Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Karen Ruprecht with the Child Care State Capacity Building Center, and thanks for being with us today for our 30-minute Ask Me Anything session on Top 10 Actions for Website Content and Design. This webinar is part of a larger consumer education webinar series hosted by the State Capacity Building Center. Today, we're going to walk through some questions that participants posed on the national webinar on this very topic 2 weeks ago today. We know you might have some additional questions as we go along, so we encourage you to put them in the chat box. The PowerPoint slide from the webinar that we hosted a couple of weeks ago will be posted on the Consumer Education Webinar Series homepage soon, and we'll post the link later on in the webinar to that website in case you don't already have it. And there's also helpful resource guides that can help you enhance your consumer education webinar, and I'll make sure that you have the link to that as well. But I want to start off by doing some introductions of our guest speakers today. As I mentioned, I'm Karen Ruprecht with the Child Care State Capacity Building Center, and today we're joined by Clem Ayung from ICF, and he works with the State Capacity Building Center on the consumer education webinars and also with some of our states that we're working with in an intensive TA capacity. And we're also joined by Jennifer Drake from the National Center on Parent, Family, and Community Engagement. And as some of you may know, on our calls, we always like to know who's on the phone with us here today. So Violetta, if you would pull up the poll, and if you could tell us which role best describes you, and we'll give you a minute or two to fill that out. Looks like we have a majority of state government professionals, which is usually, oh, actually it's kind of coming in a little bit as a tie with some other folks joining us, training and technical assistance professionals. And we have a couple of state-level government, or not state government people with us here today. So thank you for taking the time to fill that out. It's always good to know who's in the audience. There we go. So I want to start off our webinar today by asking our speakers a question, a broad question that came up in the webinar a couple of weeks ago. In the webinar, as some of you may have remembered, we reviewed a list of top 10 actions to improve website content and design. And one of the actions, I believe it was action 1, encourage people to inventory how your audience finds and reaches your website. Many states and territories want to use social media for outreach to families and child care providers, and specifically, we had a question from a participant who asked, can we tell which audience is using which channel to access our site? Can we infer who is using our website based on the channels that refer web traffic to it? So, Clem, can you get us started on answering this question?
Sure, Karen. So before we begin, I just want to clarify that when we say channels, what we really mean by is just another way of saying, how your audience finds your consumer education website. So for example, a channel might be a Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or any other website where your information is posted, and people click on it to come to your website. So you might be interested in knowing which channels your users are using to come to your website, because then that might tell you which channels you want to focus on optimizing. So common free tools like Google Analytics can tell you some basic information about the visitors on your website, like the percentage of visitors who are new visitors versus the percentage that are a returning visitor. So unless you have configured your analytics tool of your choice, it's really difficult to attribute referral data, which is like who's actually coming to your site, for one channel to a specific audience segment that you're considering for your website. So while we won't go into detail necessarily here, we do have a couple resource guides that can help you better understand web analytics, and search engine optimization that I'll share on the screen right now. The left guides. You can download these, and we will be putting the address for that in the chat box for you. Like Karen mentioned earlier, if you want to make some inferences about your channels that your family in your state prefers to use, you need to bring in other kinds of data to paint you a better picture in order to understand that question. Some of the data might be social media analytics, or even your conversation that you've had in the past with parents in your state or territory through user research or stakeholder focus groups, which can help you do that. And the third resource guide on your right, on this side, is going to be a helpful guide to help you get you thinking about how to ask your users, which could be your parents, childcare providers, or other stakeholders, about these types of questions. But just a note, however, just because your website is getting traffic from social media, it doesn't automatically mean that they're parents. You can use industry reports to kind of get a sense of, what are some general trends that maybe demographics like, parents, do online and how they access online content. But, if you really want insights into a specific audience that's relevant for your website, you'll need to either talk to them directly or use quantitative methods like surveys that you want to send out to them to collect more relevant data to your site. And if you need hints and ideas on how to gather data from parents and other audiences, you can go check out the guide to user research that we put on the screen before. Just a word of caution that sometimes analytics data can also paint an inaccurate picture. So over-relying on analytics can sometimes lead to blind spots. For example, if a visitor lands in site from clicking on a link that someone copy-pasted into a text message or apps like Facebook Messenger or email, this sort of behavior show up online or could show up on an analytics platform as direct referral traffic, which it kind of basically means someone typed in the URL into a browser or like a link from a bookmarked that you bookmarked on your site. But in reality, they really clicked on a link that someone has shared in a platform that you might not have tracked on your analytics platform. And we do have a link to that article in the AMA guide when it's posted in about a week, and we can explain how this happens. And over to you, Jennifer.
Yeah, sure. That is good information, Clem, and I would add another exemplary practices to avoid using a single data source to draw conclusions. And by that I mean augment your quantitative data, what you find from analytics, with qualitative data, for example, user feedback, to really understand why something is happening or how well something is working. If you can understand why a family in a particular situation prefers to use Facebook over going directly to your website, for example, you can start to think of strategies to kind of leverage those drivers of behaviors and get parents to your website. Basically, you won't find answers to why questions using purely quantitative methods. Consumer engagement strategies are useful for gathering that kind of qualitative feedback, for learning about your audience's interests and how well your website or social media strategy is meeting them. When consumers are engaged, you can make decisions together about enhancements to the content and how it's presented. NCPSCE's strategies for engaging families resource offers lots of ideas about different ways to gather input and partner with your audiences to identify potential enhancements and also to evaluate the effectiveness of changes that you're making. Our guide to creating a family-friendly experience offers more tips for promoting engagement through your website. And if you're responsible for developing and posting content yourself, or you support staff who do, you can directly apply the information in this guide. If you're not, and that's often the case, if your website's managed by others or if you work with a vendor to develop and post your content, you can apply this information to your plans and requests and quality improvements. Social media, as Karen mentioned at the top too, is also a powerful tool for consumer engagement. And this guide, using social media to engage families, offers lots of tips for engaging families. For example, how to respond to comments and questions from families. And it also covers developing and managing a social media plan, identifying your audiences, and connecting social media efforts to your mission. Choosing the best sites and times to post based on your audience and objectives. It covers a bit about technical requirements and promotion and quality assurance of your social media efforts. And two, relevant here is like really creating posts that kind of invite engagement, posts that are strengths-based, easy for readers to understand, and culturally and linguistically responsive.
Thanks, Clem and Jennifer, for that information. And if anyone on the webinar today is interested in more specific guidance on social media and how your state can leverage it to promote your consumer education website, I encourage you to check out the resources that we're sharing and to also consider signing up for our November webinar on using social media to enhance your web presence. So we'll talk a lot more about that in a couple of months. So I want to turn now and ask about some strategies for managing and developing website content. Clem, would you like to start us off on that?
Sure, Karen. So, in regards to managing, developing content, a big question that often comes to mind is, how do we know that we're doing the right thing and creating the right content? And, for a lot of government websites, the value of the site comes from the content, and without it, there wouldn't really be a website. So planning and creating, publishing, and maintaining content is really a large part of maintaining a website after launch. And some of this, comes down to, how your team makes decisions and having sort of like a framework or plan to help guide decision-making to ensure that it aligns with your consumer education website goals. So let me just share some strategies to get you started, and don't feel that if you don't get all of it. I think I just want to put out some ideas to help you start thinking about ways to improve the managing of the website and think about which content to create. So one of these tools is a core strategy statement. And this is a concise sentence that helps keep your team on course. It summarizes choices about individual choices within your team, about why a team produces content, for whom, and how it manifests, which is the what. And it needs to be specific enough that you can say yes or no to different tactical decisions, which is the kind of the guidance part of the sentence. And it needs to be memorable enough for your team to use it in everyday conversations. And it is not a vision statement. That's a step level up. But I think the core strategy statement is really about helping you make the right decisions for your website. And you can collaboratively develop it with your team, or if you're short on time, you can develop it yourself. You just have to do it for the entire website. You can just test it out and iterate on a smaller portion of the site if you want to, so that you can not impose like the overall strategy for a site right away. And this core strategy statement has 4 parts that you would want to consider. One is content product, which kind of translates into, the content that you want to produce, curate, or procure from other like sources, and share. And this is, how you want your information to manifest. Another part is audience. So, for whom is the content specifically written or produced for? User needs, which is why do those audiences need or expect that content from you? Like, why are you producing in the first place? And finally, business goals or organizational goals, which are the outcomes that you're striving for that you want from providing the content. How does that achieve organizational goals? And that is kind of the why you're creating it in the first place. As an example, just so you can mull around your brain, of the core strategy statement is, one could be, to increase the number of parents who use our childcare search. We will create online resource guides for working parents who are looking for childcare for the first time, to help them choose a cost-effective, quality childcare provider. And that's just an example. You don't have to memorize it or anything, but to show that how do we tie these 4 parts together to help you make decisions around your content. It doesn't have to be perfect. It could be a draft. You can, this is designed to spark conversation around these 4 areas, and decide how to move forward in the medium term to help answer the questions you need to answer to around these 4 areas to build a foundation for making decisions. Just want to also point out that maintaining content is multifaceted, and how you maintain on strategy content depends on who's in your team. Your subject matter expertise, writing skills, and publishing volume and timeline abilities, and also usability and configuration of your content management system. So, you want to kind of define some of the team roles and responsibilities, ahead of time, and kind of gauge how that would affect your strategy. And also, you want to then kind of define the process for creating and publishing content, outlining the steps and who's going to do them. And those sort of pieces will help you, maintain the site, in its usefulness and relevancy for your audience, after you launch it.
Great. Thank you, Clem, for that information. I know there's a lot of information that goes behind thinking about your strategies for maintaining and developing your content for your consumer ed website. And to go along with that question, we've had another one regarding the website content. What are some helpful strategies or considerations you have when it comes to evaluating the content on the consumer ed website? Are there tools, for example, that states and territories might be able to use to evaluate their content?
Yeah. Short answer, yes. So, achieving and maintaining quality website content requires an ongoing effort. So, ongoing quality improvement is all about setting goals, picking the right metrics to measure the effectiveness of your efforts, gathering data, and making adjustments based on the findings, and testing them continually. And then also doing all of these activities consistently. Just want to remember that content shouldn't just sit on your site after you publish it. You want to periodically review your strategy and the quality of your content to make sure that it is still relevant, useful, and up to date. So when I think about your content as having a life cycle, where you birth the content through developing the content, publishing it, and maintaining it, and then kind of evaluating whether that's still necessary or relevant to your audience. So, like a garden, it kind of needs a little more pruning for your content to flourish. And you might need to update the update or retire content that might be out of date or no longer serve your audience. So, you want to have some sort of processes or steps to kind of support regularly scheduled and, sometimes ad hoc review of your content. So some of these review activities might include a broken link scan, a review for content for accuracy, ensure that content is following plain language and search engine optimization best practices. And we do have a guide for that. It's called Guide for Including Search Engine Optimization, which you can encourage you to check out after this MAA. And also reviewing your web analytics to kind of gauge the effectiveness of your previous improvements. And we do have the web engagement section in the using data to inform your website, questions and answers from the Ask Me Anything webinar, which will provide more detailed guidance on the timelines and considerations for web analytics. The other part to reviewing your site is your content on your site is to have a regular content planning sessions, which I think will help you and your team produce on-strategy content. This is where you decide, what content to create, and you can usually start that planning process by assessing the current state of the content to validate that it's still useful, current, on strategy, and can also identify new content to enhance your website to further your website's goals and vision. And some of these, more formal and regularly scheduled content planning will help inform editorial planning, which is the when, the where, the how you'll feature and promote your content. So I think it's a good idea to, before you go into planning, you might want to review your content first to make sure it aligns with your consumer education website goals and vision. And then that will kind of help you kind of see what you need to produce, still produce, and any new kind of content you want to produce outside of that kind of realm. Otherwise, just looking at analytics to consider, which content performed well and which didn't, and that might give you insight into, what people are looking for versus what, is less relevant to what they need to complete. Again, the guide for measuring web traffic and engagement, the resource guide will help provide more tips to create kind of that digital analytics process for you to get insights from your analytics platform. And when you don't want to create everything, right? So you probably also want to consider having some sort of like prioritization framework, like impact versus audience impact, or organizational impact versus audience impact, or effort versus value. Whatever that's important for your audience or for your organization and your audience. So you want to kind of have that in place as a decision-making mechanism to help you make good decisions. After that, editorial planning, I think that maybe is a little more common, which I won't go into now. But you also, you want to kind of schedule, when, where, and how you'll promote your content on like different channels like social media, Facebook, paid kind of media opportunities, etc. And I'm going to hand the reins to Jennifer to talk a little bit more about the resource that.
Yeah, thanks, Clem. Yeah, I just wanted to add that the Consumer Education Website Guide to Creating a Family-Friendly Experience resource that I mentioned earlier includes an assessment tool, and it goes along with all of the points that are discussed in the guide, but it can be handy too as a tool to help you kind of regularly check in on quality measures such as the overall look and feel of your website, plain language, strength-based language, ease of use, and more. You can answer questions like, how do we know what content we should be creating and what can we do to keep the website fresh and dynamic? And make sure that it's continually updated so that it's responsive to families' interests. So it's a nice complement to some of the other strategies that you discussed, Clem.
Great. Thank you both, Jen and Clem, for sharing your ideas on how to improve the content and design of your consumer education website. I know there's a lot of information that was packed into some of the details that Clem and Jennifer gave us here today, and I want to share with you, and again, this will be on the website as well, some of the resources that were shared here today from both SCBC and the NCPSCE. I encourage you to check these out. These resources were really developed to help you enhance the website content and design, so please use them. And here's some other resources as well. And again, these will be posted for your convenience in just a little while. As we close out today, as we usually do, we want to take a couple of polls to see if the information that you heard today was relevant and useful. So I'll have Violetta pull up those polls for us. So our first question is, how much has your understanding of this topic improved? So if you just want to go ahead and complete that, we would appreciate that. It really does help us think about how we can better serve the needs of our states and territories and technical assistance professionals that are on the line with us here today. Okay. Okay, Violetta, if you want to pull up the next poll, please. And the next poll asks, how likely are you to use one of the strategies or practices presented to you today? Okay. And then, Violetta, if you want to pull up the last one. And this is our open-ended one. If there's any other webinar topics that you would find useful in your work, if it's with the consumer education websites, great. If it's something that's outside of the purview of the consumer education websites, that's fine to indicate on this section of the polls too. So I'll give folks a minute if there's any other webinar topics that you would find useful. We really find this information quite useful as we're planning some other webinars, hopefully in the future. Okay. Yeah, a couple more coming in, it looks like. All right, and Violetta, if you want to just kind of flip it over. If you do continue to have some future ideas, please feel free to email us, and we will certainly add it to the list because we do want to make sure that we're as responsive as we can be to folks' needs. And I just want to remind, oops, I think we both of us clicked on the slide at the same time. I want to remind everybody about our next topic webinar, which is on September 12th, and we will be in partnership with NCASE on this webinar about, don't forget about school-age child care in your consumer education website. And on this webinar, we'll explore different ways that some states have used their child care search filters and search results and informational resources to share with school-age families. So this webinar will give you some nice tips and resources to take back and to consider enhancing your own consumer education website. And it's very timely because it's back to school time for so many people. So we hope you join us on that webinar as well with our partners with NCASE. We thank you for joining us here today. We hope you all have a great day. And please remember, we will be posting the information from this webinar on the Consumer Education Webinar Series homepage shortly. Thank you and have a great day, everyone.